Elena Vasquez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her friends spent their afternoons at the mall or gossiping about boys, she could be found in her grandfather's workshop, learning to fix engines or practicing her aim with his old hunting rifle. Her hands, though slender and feminine, had developed calluses from years of working with tools and machinery. When she turned 18, Elena made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She walked into the Army recruitment office on a sweltering Tuesday morning in July, her long black hair tied back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt. The recruiter, Sergeant Martinez, looked up from his desk with surprise. Young women didn't often walk through his doors with the determined look Elena carried. "I want to enlist," she said simply, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Sergeant Martinez had seen many recruits over his 15 years in the service, but something about Elena's quiet confidence caught his attention. After completing the paperwork and scheduling her for the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, he watched her leave with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The military was still very much a man's world, and he wondered if this soft-spoken girl truly understood what she was signing up for. Elena's family reacted exactly as she had expected. Her mother cried for 3 days straight, alternating between pleading with her daughter to reconsider and angrily demanding to know where she had gone wrong as a parent. Her father, a construction foreman with traditional values, simply shook his head in disappointment. "The military is no place for a woman," he said during one of their heated arguments. "You'll get yourself killed or worse. Why can't you just go to college like a normal girl?" But Elena's mind was made up. She had always felt called to serve something bigger than herself, and the military offered her a chance to prove that she was more than just another small-town girl destined for an ordinary life. Her grandfather, the only family member who seemed to understand her decision, pulled her aside the night before she left for basic training. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said quietly, his weathered hands resting on her shoulders. "She was a nurse in World War II, you know. Served in the Pacific. People said women had no business being so close to combat, but she saved more lives than most soldiers ever took." The bus ride to Fort Benning felt like the longest journey of Elena's life. As the familiar landscapes of Texas gave way to the red clay hills of Georgia, she found herself surrounded by young men who seemed to view her presence with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Some tried to make conversation, asking why a pretty girl like her wanted to be a soldier. Others simply stared, as if she were an exotic animal in a zoo. Her first glimpse of the training facility did nothing to calm her nerves. The sprawling complex of concrete buildings and training grounds stretched as far as the eye could see, filled with the sounds of shouting drill sergeants and marching feet. As the bus pulled to a stop, Elena took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was here. The initial processing was a blur of medical examinations, paperwork, and uniform fittings. Elena found herself in a sea of male faces, one of only 3 women in her training company. The other 2 women, Jessica from Ohio and Maria from California, seemed just as overwhelmed as she felt. They stuck together during those first confusing days, finding comfort in their shared experience of being outsiders in this testosterone-filled environment. Drill Sergeant Thompson was exactly what Elena had expected from military movies, an imposing man with a voice that could shatter glass and eyes that seemed to see right through his recruits. When he addressed the company for the first time, his gaze lingered on the 3 women with obvious skepticism. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing across the formation, "you are here to become soldiers. Not men, not women, but soldiers. Some of you might think this is summer camp or some kind of game. Let me disabuse you of that notion right now. The first few weeks of basic training were brutal for everyone, but Elena quickly discovered that being a woman in this environment meant facing additional challenges. The physical training was demanding enough, but the constant scrutiny and whispered comments from some of her male counterparts added an extra layer of difficulty. During morning PT sessions, she could hear snickers when she struggled with pull-ups and whispered bets about how long she would last before quitting. Some of the men made it clear they believed women had no place in combat roles, viewing them as potential liabilities who would get real soldiers killed in battle. Elena's bunkmate, a cocky kid from Detroit named Marcus, seemed particularly intent on making her feel unwelcome. He would make subtle comments about women belonging in the kitchen, not the barracks, and would accidentally bump into her during formations. His friends found his behavior amusing, treating Elena's presence as some kind of joke. But Elena had not come this far to be defeated by ignorant comments and petty harassment. Each morning she got up before reveille to do extra push-ups and sit-ups, determined to prove that she belonged here. When the other recruits struggled with equipment maintenance, she drew on the mechanical knowledge her grandfather had taught her, quietly helping those who needed assistance while asking for nothing in return. The weapons training phase of basic training was what Elena had been both anticipating and dreading. She had always been comfortable around firearms, but she knew this would be where many of her fellow recruits would expect her to fail. As they filed into the armory to receive their M16 rifles, she could feel the weight of dozens of skeptical stares. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez, who oversaw the weapons training, handed each recruit their assigned rifle with practiced efficiency. When he reached Elena, he paused for a moment, studying her face. "Think you can handle this, soldier?" he asked, not unkindly but with obvious doubt. Elena accepted the rifle with steady hands, feeling its familiar weight. "Yes, Drill Sergeant," she replied simply. As the recruits filed out to the firing range, Marcus leaned over to his buddy Johnson with a smirk. "$10 says she can't hit the broadside of a barn," he whispered. Elena heard the comment but said nothing. She had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words, and soon enough, her fellow soldiers would see exactly what she was capable of. The hot Georgia sun beat down on the firing range as the recruits took their positions, and Elena felt a familiar calm settle over her as she prepared to show them all what those soft hands could really do. The firing range stretched out before the recruits like a proving ground of concrete and steel. Targets stood at various distances, from the basic 25-meter markers to the more challenging 300-meter positions. Elena could smell the familiar scent of gun oil and spent ammunition that seemed to permeate every military firing range she had ever encountered. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez began his weapons safety briefing with military precision, his voice carrying across the range despite the Georgia heat that was already making several recruits sweat through their uniforms. Elena listened intently, though much of what he said was familiar from her years of training with her grandfather. Still, she knew that military protocols were different from civilian shooting, and she was determined to follow every rule to the letter. "The M16A2 service rifle is your primary weapon," Rodriguez continued, holding up the black rifle for emphasis. "It will keep you alive in combat, but only if you respect it and master it. Today we begin to see who among you has what it takes to be a marksman." As the drill sergeant spoke, Elena noticed Marcus and several other male recruits glancing in her direction with barely concealed amusement. She could practically hear their thoughts, the same doubts that had followed her since she had first announced her intention to join the military. In their minds, she was just another woman trying to prove something in a man's world, destined to fail when things got serious. The first exercise was basic rifle handling and safety procedures. Elena moved through the weapon inspection and loading procedures with smooth efficiency, her movements economical and precise. Years of handling her grandfather's rifles had taught her that every motion should have purpose, that fumbling with a weapon could mean the difference between life and death. Jessica, one of the other women in the company, struggled with the rifle's weight and unfamiliar mechanisms. Elena wanted to help her, but she knew that drawing attention to any perceived weakness would only reinforce the stereotypes they were all fighting against. Instead, she focused on her own performance, demonstrating through example rather than instruction. When it came time for the actual firing exercise, the recruits were divided into groups of 10. Elena found herself positioned between Marcus on her left and a quiet recruit named David from Oregon on her right. David had been one of the few men who had treated her with basic respect since training began, never joining in the whispered jokes or making crude comments about women in combat. The first stage was prone position shooting at 25 meters. Elena settled into position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. The target downrange seemed larger than necessary after years of shooting at much smaller targets with her grandfather's hunting rifle. She controlled her breathing the way she had been taught, letting her heart rate settle into a steady rhythm. "Ready on the left, ready on the right, ready on the firing line," Rodriguez called out. "Commence firing when ready." The sound of gunfire erupted along the line as recruits began engaging their targets. Elena waited a moment longer, letting the initial chaos settle before squeezing the trigger with smooth, steady pressure. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, but she absorbed the recoil naturally, already acquiring her next sight picture before the brass had finished falling. She fired her 10 rounds in a measured cadence, neither rushing like some of the nervous recruits nor hesitating like others who seemed intimidated by the weapon. Each shot was deliberate, the result of years of training and natural ability coming together in perfect harmony. When the ceasefire command rang out, Elena set her rifle down and waited calmly, while the range officers collected targets for scoring. Around her, recruits were chattering nervously about their performance, some boasting while others worried aloud about their accuracy. Elena remained silent, confident in her shooting but unwilling to draw unnecessary attention. Marcus had been unusually quiet during the firing exercise, focusing intently on his own target. As they waited for results, he turned to Elena with a patronizing smile. "Not too bad for your first time with a real rifle," he said. "I'm sure you'll get the hang of it eventually." Elena simply nodded politely, refusing to take the bait. She had learned from her grandfather that real shooters let their targets do the talking. When Drill Sergeant Rodriguez returned with the scored targets, his expression was unreadable as he began calling out results. Most recruits had managed to hit the target, though accuracy varied widely. Several had missed entirely, their shots scattered around the edges of the target paper. "Johnson, 15 out of 40 possible points," Rodriguez called out. "Martinez, 22 out of 40. Williams, 18 out of 40. The scores continued, with most recruits falling somewhere between 15 and 25 points. A few of the better shooters managed to score in the low 30s, drawing approving nods from the drill sergeant. "Marcus Thompson," Rodriguez announced, 31 out of 40. "Good shooting, recruit." Marcus grinned broadly, clearly pleased with his performance. He had always prided himself on his marksmanship, having grown up hunting with his father in the Michigan woods. 31 was a solid score, better than most of his fellow recruits. "Vasquez," the drill sergeant called out, his voice carrying a slight note of surprise. Elena stepped forward to receive her target, maintaining her military bearing despite the curious stares of her fellow recruits. Rodriguez held up her target for the group to see, and the range fell silent. Every single shot had found the center ring of the target. Not just the target itself, but the small black circle at its heart. 10 perfect shots clustered so tightly that several of the holes overlapped. It was the kind of shooting that even experienced soldiers rarely achieved on their first time with a new weapon. 40 out of 40, Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying new respect. "Perfect score." The silence stretched on for several seconds as the implications sank in. Elena had not just outshot the men who had been questioning her presence. She had achieved something that none of them had even come close to. Her soft hands had delivered the kind of precision that military instructors dreamed of seeing from their students. Marcus stared at the target in disbelief, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. The recruit who had been making jokes about women belonging in kitchens had just been thoroughly outclassed by the very person he had been mocking. "Outstanding work, Recruit Vasquez," Rodriguez said as he handed her the target. "Have you fired this weapon system before?" "No, Drill Sergeant," Elena replied. "But I have experience with civilian rifles." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. In his 15 years of military service, he had seen thousands of recruits fire their first rounds at this very range. Perfect scores were rare even among experienced hunters and competitive shooters. To achieve it on a first attempt with an unfamiliar weapon spoke to natural ability and years of proper training. As the group moved to the next firing position for standing shots at 50 meters, the dynamic had subtly changed. The whispered comments and snickering had stopped, replaced by curious glances and grudging attention. Elena noticed that several recruits who had previously ignored her were now watching her rifle handling techniques with obvious interest. The standing position was more challenging, requiring greater muscle control and breath management. Elena settled into her stance, feeling the slight shift in balance that came with shooting without the ground for support. The target seemed smaller at 50 meters, but she had been making similar shots since she was 14 years old. This time, when she began firing, several of the other recruits stopped to watch her technique. Her stance was rock steady, her trigger control smooth and consistent. Each shot seemed to flow naturally into the next with no wasted motion or apparent effort. When the targets were scored this time, Elena had again achieved a perfect score, though the feat seemed less shocking now. Rodriguez looked at her target with the expression of an instructor who had discovered a rare talent among his students. "Recruit Vasquez," he said after announcing the scores. "Have you considered applying for sniper school?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to every preconceived notion her fellow recruits had carried. Elena Vasquez, the woman they had dismissed as too soft for military service, was being invited to pursue one of the most demanding and respected specialties in the entire armed forces. The question about sniper school echoed through the barracks that evening like wildfire. Word of Elena's perfect shooting scores had spread throughout the training company, and suddenly the woman who had been dismissed as unsuitable for military service found herself at the center of intense speculation and curiosity. Elena sat on her bunk, methodically cleaning her rifle according to the procedures they had learned that day. The familiar ritual of weapon maintenance was soothing, reminding her of countless evenings spent with her grandfather in his workshop. Around her, the usual evening conversations had taken on a different tone. Where once recruits had spoken about her in whispers and jokes, now they discussed her shooting ability with a mixture of amazement and respect. Marcus approached her bunk with obvious reluctance, his earlier swagger replaced by something resembling humility. He had spent the afternoon in uncomfortable silence, wrestling with the reality that his assumptions about women in combat had been thoroughly shattered by Elena's performance. "Hey, Vasquez," he said awkwardly, standing beside her bunk while she continued cleaning her rifle. "I wanted to ask you something." Elena looked up from her work, her expression neutral but attentive. She had learned not to expect apologies from people like Marcus, but she was curious about what had motivated him to approach her. "That shooting today," Marcus continued, clearly struggling with his words. "I mean, that was some serious skill. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My grandfather taught me," Elena replied simply, returning to her weapon maintenance. "Started when I was 12. He was a Marine in Korea." The mention of Marine service seemed to register with Marcus in a way that civilian hunting experience might not have. In the military hierarchy of respect, Marine combat veterans occupied a position near the top, and the idea that Elena had been trained by one gave her credibility that no amount of perfect scores alone could have provided. "What did he teach you?" Marcus asked, his curiosity now genuine rather than mocking. Elena paused in her cleaning, considering how much to share. She had spent weeks enduring skepticism and outright hostility from many of her fellow recruits, and she was naturally cautious about revealing too much about her background. But something in Marcus's tone suggested that his interest was sincere. "Patience," she said finally. "He always said that shooting was 10% technique and 90% patience. Most people want to rush to prove something, but the target isn't going anywhere. Take your time, control your breathing, and let the shot happen naturally." Several other recruits had drifted closer to listen to the conversation, drawn by curiosity about Elena's background. David, the quiet recruit from Oregon who had always treated her respectfully, sat down on a nearby footlocker. "My dad was in the Army," David said. "Infantry and Desert Storm. He always said that the best soldiers were the ones who stayed calm under pressure. That's what you looked like out there today, completely calm." Elena nodded acknowledgement of the compliment but continued focusing on her rifle. She had learned that in military culture, competence earned respect, but overconfidence could quickly turn that respect into resentment. Better to let her performance speak for itself than to risk being seen as boastful. Jessica approached the group with her own rifle, clearly struggling with the cleaning process. Her target scores had been among the lowest in the company, and Elena could see the frustration and embarrassment in her face. "Could you maybe show me how to clean this properly?" Jessica asked quietly. "I think I'm doing something wrong." Elena set down her own weapon and moved to help Jessica with hers. As she demonstrated the proper cleaning technique, she found herself surrounded by an impromptu audience of recruits who were eager to learn from someone who had clearly mastered the fundamentals. "The key is to be systematic," Elena explained as she guided Jessica through the process. "Same sequence every time so you don't miss anything. My grandfather used to say that a clean rifle was a reliable rifle, and a reliable rifle could save your life." As the evening progressed, the informal training session expanded beyond weapon cleaning. Recruits began asking Elena about shooting techniques, stance, breathing, and sight alignment. She found herself in the unusual position of being sought out for advice by the same people who had been, questioning her right to be there just days. Earlier, the transformation was not lost on Drill Sergeant Thompson, who observed the scene from his office at the end of the barracks. In his 20 years of military service, he had seen many recruits struggle to find their place in the rigid hierarchy of military training. But it was rare to see someone earn respect as quickly and thoroughly as Elena had managed to do. The next morning brought advanced marksmanship training, including longer-range shooting and more challenging positions. Elena found herself assigned to a squad with Marcus, David, and several other recruits who had shown promise during the previous day's exercises. Staff Sergeant Williams, a decorated infantry veteran with multiple combat deployments, supervised the advanced training. He had heard about Elena's perfect scores and was curious to see if her performance would hold up under more demanding conditions. "Today we're going to separate the shooters from the spray and prayers," Williams announced as the squad gathered around him. "We'll be engaging targets at ranges from 100 to 300 meters, from various positions and under time pressure. This is closer to what you might face in actual combat situations." The first exercise involved shooting from behind cover, simulating urban combat conditions. Elena settled into position behind a concrete barrier, adjusting her stance to accommodate the awkward angle required by the cover. The target was partially obscured, requiring precise shot placement to score hits in the exposed areas. When the command came to commence firing, Elena's shots rang out in a steady rhythm, each one carefully aimed despite the time pressure. Around her, other recruits fired more rapidly, some apparently hoping that volume of fire would compensate for lack of precision. The results, when they came back from the scoring detail, told the now familiar story. Elena had achieved the highest score in the squad, with every shot finding its intended mark. But more importantly, she had done so while maintaining the kind of fire discipline and precision that marked a true marksman, rather than just a good shooter. Staff Sergeant Williams studied Elena's target with the expression of a professional evaluating the work of a peer. In his experience, the kind of consistency she was demonstrating usually took years of training and combat experience to develop. "Vasquez," he called out, after reviewing all the targets. "Step forward." Elena approached the staff sergeant with military precision, wondering if she had somehow violated a procedure she was unaware of. Williams studied her for a moment before speaking. "I've been shooting for 15 years, been in combat in Afghanistan and Iraq," he said quietly, so the rest of the squad couldn't hear. "I've seen a lot of good shooters, some great ones, and a few who were just born to it. You've got something special, recruit. Don't waste it." The compliment carried weight because it came from someone who had earned the right to make such judgments through years of combat experience. Elena felt a surge of pride, but also the weight of new expectations. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant," she replied. "What would you recommend I do with it?" Williams glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard, then leaned slightly closer. "When you finish basic, apply for sniper school. It's tough to get accepted, especially for women. But with scores like yours, you've got a real chance. The military needs more shooters who can perform under pressure." As the training day continued, Elena found herself thinking about the staff sergeant's words. Sniper school represented the pinnacle of marksmanship training in the military, a program so demanding that many experienced soldiers failed to complete it. For a woman barely 3 weeks into basic training to be encouraged to apply was almost unprecedented. But more than the professional opportunity, Elena realized that something fundamental had changed in her relationship with her fellow recruits. The jeers and skeptical comments had been replaced by requests for advice and grudging respect. Her soft hands, once seen as evidence of her unsuitability for military service, were now recognized as the hands of a natural marksman. That evening, as she lay in her bunk listening to the familiar sounds of the barracks settling down for the night, Elena thought about her grandfather's words from years earlier. He had told her that respect couldn't be demanded or borrowed. It had to be earned through actions and consistency. She was finally beginning to understand what he meant. 3 weeks later, Elena found herself facing the most challenging test of her military training so far. The field training exercise was designed to simulate combat conditions as closely as possible within the confines of basic training. For 5 days, the recruits would live in the field, conducting patrols, setting up defensive positions, and engaging simulated enemy forces using blank ammunition and laser tag equipment. The exercise began at 400 hours with a simulated attack on their base camp. Elena jolted awake to the sound of blank gunfire and the shouting of cadre members playing the role of enemy forces. Around her, recruits scrambled to grab their equipment and weapons, some still disoriented by the sudden wake-up call. Elena's training with her grandfather had included camping and survival skills, so she adapted quickly to the field environment. While some of her fellow recruits struggled with the lack of showers and comfortable beds, she found the outdoor conditions almost familiar. The real challenge would come when they had to apply their marksmanship skills under the stress and confusion of simulated combat. Her squad had been assigned to defensive positions on a hill overlooking a valley where opposing forces were expected to advance. Elena found herself positioned behind a sandbagged fighting position with Marcus as her battle buddy, a pairing that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. "You nervous?" Marcus asked as they settled into their position and began scanning the valley below for signs of the enemy force. "A little," Elena admitted honestly. "This is different from shooting at stationary targets on a range." Marcus nodded, understanding the difference between range shooting and combat marksmanship. In the field, targets moved, appeared, and disappeared quickly, and shooters had to make split-second decisions about when and where to engage. The first contact came 2 hours after they had taken their positions. Elena spotted movement in the tree line about 200 meters away. Barely visible figures in camouflage moving from cover to cover. She adjusted her rifle's sights and prepared to engage when the figures emerged into the open. Movement. 2 o'clock, she whispered to Marcus, who was scanning a different section of their assigned area. "I see them," Marcus replied, bringing his rifle to bear on the same area. When the opposing force finally broke cover to begin their advance, Elena was ready. Her first shot with a blank ammunition struck the lead figure center mass, causing the laser tag equipment to register a hit. The cadre member playing the enemy soldier immediately dropped to the ground and remained still, simulating a casualty. Around the defensive perimeter, other recruits opened fire as more opposing forces appeared. The noise was overwhelming, with blank rounds creating sharp cracks and drill sergeants shouting commands and casualty reports. In the chaos, some recruits panicked and began firing wildly, while others froze under the pressure. Elena remained calm, picking her targets carefully and firing only when she had a clear shot. Her marksmanship training had taught her to ignore distractions and focus on the fundamentals, and that discipline served her well in the simulated combat environment. "Vasquez, good shooting," shouted Staff Sergeant Williams, who was observing the exercise from a position behind their line. "Keep picking them off." The engagement lasted for 20 minutes, with waves of opposing forces attempting to advance up the hill while the defenders tried to stop them. Elena accounted for 6 confirmed hits during the firefight, the highest number in her squad, and one of the best in the entire defensive line. When the ceasefire was called and the cadre began conducting their after-action review, Elena found herself the subject of considerable attention from both instructors and fellow recruits. Her performance under simulated combat stress had been even more impressive than her range shooting, demonstrating that her skills translated well to realistic conditions. "Outstanding work, Vasquez," said Captain Morrison, the company commander who had been observing the exercise. "That's exactly the kind of fire discipline and accuracy we need to see from our soldiers." The praise from the company commander carried significant weight, and Elena noticed that the last traces of skepticism about her military potential had finally disappeared from the faces of her fellow recruits. She was no longer the woman trying to prove she belonged. She was simply a skilled soldier who happened to be female. That evening, as the squad established their patrol base for the night, Elena found herself in an informal leadership role despite being one of the newest recruits. Other soldiers sought her advice on weapon placement, target identification, and shooting techniques. The soft-spoken girl from Texas had become someone others looked to for guidance in tactical situations. David approached her during the evening meal, carrying his rifle and wearing a troubled expression. "Can you take a look at this?" he asked, indicating his weapon. "Something doesn't feel right, but I can't figure out what it is." Elena examined David's rifle carefully, checking the action and looking through the sights. After a few minutes, she identified the problem. A small piece of debris in the trigger mechanism that was affecting the weapon's operation. "Here's your issue," she said, showing David the problem and explaining how to fix it. "Always check your trigger group after field exercises. Dirt and debris can really mess with your accuracy." As Elena helped David clean and adjust his rifle, several other recruits gathered around to watch and learn. She found herself conducting another impromptu training session, sharing the maintenance and troubleshooting skills her grandfather had taught her years earlier. Jessica, who had struggled with marksmanship throughout basic training, seemed particularly interested in Elena's explanations of shooting fundamentals. "I just can't seem to get consistent groups," Jessica said frustratedly. "My shots are all over the target and I can't figure out what I'm doing wrong." Elena studied Jessica's stance and grip on her rifle, quickly identifying several areas for improvement. "Try adjusting your grip like this," Elena demonstrated, "and shift your weight slightly forward. A lot of shooting problems come from inconsistent body position." Under Elena's patient guidance, Jessica began to show improvement in her shooting technique. It was satisfying for Elena to see another soldier develop confidence and skill, and it reinforced her growing reputation as someone who could teach as well as shoot. The field exercise continued for 3 more days, with increasingly complex scenarios designed to test the recruits' tactical skills and ability to work as a team. Elena consistently performed at the top of her class, but more importantly, she had become an integral part of her unit's success. During a night patrol on the 4th day, Elena's squad was tasked with conducting reconnaissance of a simulated enemy position. Moving through the dark woods with night vision equipment, they had to gather intelligence while avoiding detection by the opposing force. Elena found herself walking point for the patrol, a position typically reserved for the most experienced and capable soldiers. Her natural fieldcraft skills, learned during years of hunting with her grandfather, made her ideally suited for the role. She could move quietly through the underbrush and spot potential threats before they became dangers to the squad. When they finally reached their observation point overlooking the enemy position, Elena was able to identify and count the opposing forces with remarkable accuracy. Her report to the squad leader included precise locations of defensive positions, weapon emplacements, and patrol routes. "Excellent reconnaissance." "Vasquez," whispered Sergeant Rodriguez, who was accompanying the patrol as an evaluator. "That's exactly the kind of detailed intelligence we need for mission planning." The final day of the field exercise culminated in a major assault on the enemy position, with Elena's company attacking the same area she had reconnoitered the night before. Armed with the intelligence she had gathered, the assault was able to avoid the strongest defensive positions and exploit weaknesses in the enemy's setup. Elena found herself designated as one of the squad's designated marksmen for the assault, tasked with providing precision fire support while the rest of the squad maneuvered. It was a role that played to her strengths and demonstrated the trust her leaders had developed in her abilities. As the assault began, Elena took up a position that provided clear fields of fire across the objective area. When enemy forces appeared to engage her advancing squad mates, she was ready with accurate suppressive fire that kept the opposing forces pinned down while her team moved to better positions. The assault was a complete success, with Elena's precision shooting playing a crucial role in the victory. When the after-action review was conducted, she was singled out for praise by multiple evaluators and instructors. Standing there in her muddy uniform, her rifle slung across her shoulder and her face streaked with camouflage paint, Elena looked every inch the competent soldier she had become. The transformation from doubted recruit to respected warrior was now complete, witnessed by everyone who had initially questioned whether she belonged in their ranks. As the company prepared to return to the barracks for the final weeks of basic training, Elena reflected on how much had changed since that first day on the firing range. The jeers and skeptical comments were now distant memories, replaced by the respect of her peers and the confidence that came from proven competence under pressure. The final weeks of basic training brought new challenges and opportunities for Elena. Word of her exceptional marksmanship and field performance had reached the attention of higher-ranking officers, and she found herself being considered for advanced training programs that few recruits were even aware existed. Captain Morrison called Elena to his office on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks before graduation. She had never been called to see the company commander individually, and she wondered if she had somehow violated a regulation or procedure. When she knocked on his door and heard his gruff enter, she stepped inside and snapped to attention. "At ease, recruit," Morrison said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Have a seat. We need to talk about your future." Elena sat down carefully, maintaining her military bearing while wondering what this conversation might lead to. Captain Morrison was a combat veteran with 3 deployments to Afghanistan, and his opinion carried considerable weight in determining where soldiers would be assigned after basic training. "I've been reviewing your training records," Morrison began, opening a folder on his desk. "Perfect scores on marksmanship, excellent performance in field exercises, strong leadership potential, and according to your instructors, you're one of the most composed recruits they've seen under pressure." Elena listened without speaking, unsure whether this was leading to praise or some kind of problem she wasn't aware of. "I'm recommending you for sniper school," Morrison continued. "It's a tough program and the failure rate is high even for experienced soldiers. But based on what I've seen, you've got the skills and temperament for it." The recommendation was both thrilling and intimidating. Sniper school was legendary for its difficulty, both physically and mentally. Students had to master not just extreme range marksmanship, but also fieldcraft camouflage observation techniques and the psychological demands of precision shooting in combat situations. "Thank you, sir," Elena replied. "I would be honored to attend sniper school." Morrison nodded approvingly. "The course doesn't start for another 6 months, so you'll be assigned to an infantry unit for initial training first. Use that time to continue developing your skills. The instructors at sniper school don't care about your basic training scores. They'll test everything from scratch and they'll push you harder than you've ever been pushed before." After leaving the captain's office, Elena felt a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. She had dreamed of opportunities like this, but the reality of being selected for such an elite program was almost overwhelming. She would be competing against soldiers with years of experience, and as one of the very few women ever to attempt the course, she would face additional scrutiny. The news of her selection spread quickly through the company, generating a variety of reactions from her fellow recruits. Most were genuinely congratulatory, recognizing that her selection was based purely on merit. A few seemed resentful, particularly some who had initially been her harshest critics. Marcus approached her that evening with an expression she had never seen from him before. It was a mixture of respect, admiration, and perhaps a touch of embarrassment at how he had initially treated her. "Sniper school," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "That's incredible, Elena. I mean, that's like making it to the Olympics of shooting." Elena appreciated the acknowledgement, especially from someone who had once openly questioned her right to be there. "Thanks, Marcus. It's going to be a challenge." "You'll crush it," David said, joining the conversation. "I've watched you shoot for months now, and you've got something special. Just don't forget about us regular infantry types when you're making impossible shots from a mile away." The attention was gratifying, but Elena remained focused on the challenges ahead. She knew that sniper school would test not just her marksmanship, but her mental toughness, physical endurance, and ability to perform under extreme pressure. The stakes would be much higher than anything she had faced in basic training. During the final field exercise of basic training, Elena was given the opportunity to work with the company's designated marksman rifle, a more precise weapon than the standard M16. The exercise involved long-range target engagement at distances up to 600 meters, far beyond what most infantry soldiers were expected to attempt. Elena settled into position behind the specialized rifle, adjusting the scope and calculating the adjustments needed for wind and distance. The target was barely visible through the scope, a small silhouette that required absolute precision to hit consistently. Her first shot struck the target dead center, followed by 4 more hits in a tight group that could have been covered by a playing card. The range officer called out the scores in amazement, drawing the attention of instructors and recruits from across the training area. "Outstanding shooting, Vasquez," called out Master Sergeant Davis, the senior marksmanship instructor. "That's some serious long-range work." The performance reinforced everyone's confidence in Elena's selection for sniper school, but it also reminded her of the expectations she would face. At sniper school, shots like the ones she had just made would be considered routine. She would need to perform at that level consistently, under much more demanding conditions. As basic training drew to a close, Elena received word about her first assignment. She would be stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with the 101st Airborne Division. It was one of the Army's most prestigious units, with a long history of combat operations and a reputation for excellence. The 101st was also known for its demanding standards and intensive training schedule. Elena would have 6 months to prove herself in an operational unit before reporting to sniper school. Those 6 months would be crucial for developing the additional skills and experience she would need to succeed in the advanced course. Graduation day arrived with the pomp and ceremony traditional to military training. Elena stood in formation wearing her dress uniform, surrounded by the recruits who had started the journey with her 12 weeks earlier. Looking back, it seemed impossible that she had once been the subject of doubt and mockery from many of the same people who now regarded her as one of their most accomplished classmates. Her family had come for the graduation ceremony, including her grandfather, who looked at her with obvious pride. Her parents, who had initially opposed her military service, now seemed to understand what she had accomplished. Her father, in particular, appeared impressed by the transformation he saw in his daughter. "You look like a real soldier," he said after the ceremony, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there when she first enlisted. Her grandfather pulled her aside for a private conversation, his weathered hands resting on her shoulders the same way they had the night before she left for basic training. "Your grandmother would be so proud," he said quietly. "You've proven that skill and determination matter more than what other people think you can or can't do." Elena hugged her grandfather tightly, grateful for the foundation he had provided for everything she had accomplished. Without his patient teaching and encouragement, she never would have developed the skills that had opened these opportunities. As her family prepared to leave, Elena felt a sense of completion mixed with anticipation for the challenges ahead. Basic training had been just the beginning of her military journey, a proving ground where she had established her competence and earned the respect of her peers and instructors. That evening, as she packed her belongings for the move to Fort Campbell, Elena reflected on everything that had changed since she first walked into that recruiting office in Texas. The soft hands that had once been seen as evidence of her unsuitability for military service were now recognized as the hands of a natural marksman, capable of precision that few soldiers could match. Marcus approached her as she was finishing her packing, carrying something wrapped in cloth. "I wanted to give you this," he said, unwrapping a small wooden plaque. "My dad made it. He's a woodworker back in Detroit." The plaque bore Elena's name and the dates of their basic training, along with a simple inscription, "Outstanding Soldier and Marksman." It was a gesture of respect and friendship that meant more to Elena than any official award. "Thank you, Marcus," she said genuinely. "This means a lot." "You earned it," Marcus replied. "You taught us all something about not judging people before we know what they're capable of." As Elena settled into her bunk for the final night of basic training, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but she faced them with the confidence that came from having proven herself against the doubts of others and, perhaps more importantly, against her own fears and uncertainties. The girl who had been mocked for her soft hands had become a soldier respected for her deadly skill with a rifle. Now she would have the chance to develop that skill even further, to become part of an elite community of warriors whose precision and dedication could make the difference between life and death on the battlefield. 6 months at Fort Campbell had transformed Elena from a promising recruit into a seasoned infantry soldier. The 101st Airborne Division lived up to its reputation for demanding excellence, and every day brought new challenges that tested her skills, endurance, and mental toughness. The airborne training alone had been intense, requiring her to overcome her natural fear of heights and master the art of parachuting into combat zones. Her platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, was a veteran of multiple combat deployments who had initially been skeptical about having a woman in his unit, but Elena's consistent performance and unflappable demeanor under pressure had quickly won his respect and confidence. "Vasquez," Rodriguez called out after a particularly challenging live-fire exercise, "you're ready for sniper school. Hell, you've been ready since the day you got here." The endorsement from Rodriguez carried significant weight, as he was known throughout the battalion for his high standards and reluctance to praise soldiers unless they truly deserved it. Elena felt a surge of confidence, knowing that her immediate superiors believed she was prepared for the next challenge. When orders finally came for her to report to the U.S. Army Sniper School at Fort Benning, Elena felt a familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was the opportunity she had been working toward since basic training, but she knew that the next 8 weeks would be the most demanding of her military career. The night before she left Fort Campbell, her squad threw an impromptu going-away gathering. These soldiers, who had become her brothers and sisters in arms, presented her with a small gift, a custom-made rifle cleaning kit engraved with her name and the unit insignia. "Bring some honor to the 101st, said Specialist Johnson, one of her closest friends in the unit. "And don't forget to come back and teach us some of those sniper tricks." Elena arrived at Fort Benning on a humid Georgia morning, carrying her duffel bag and feeling the weight of expectations from everyone who had supported her journey. The sniper school compound was smaller and more austere than she had expected, reflecting the elite nature of the program and its focus on practical training rather than ceremony. She was one of 36 students in her class, and as she looked around during the initial formation, she realized she was the only woman. The other students were all experienced soldiers, many with combat deployments and years of infantry experience. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with skepticism, and a few with the kind of dismissive attitude she had encountered during basic training. Master Sergeant Thompson, the chief instructor, was a legend in sniper circles. With over 20 confirmed kills in Iraq and Afghanistan, he commanded immediate respect from everyone in the program. His piercing gray eyes seemed to evaluate each student as he spoke during the opening briefing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the authority of hard-won experience, "you are here because someone believes you have the potential to become a sniper. I'm here to find out if they're right. Most of you will fail this course. That's not a prediction, it's a statistical fact. The question is whether you'll be one of the few who make it through." The first week was devoted to academic instruction covering ballistics, weather effects, range estimation, and target identification. Elena threw herself into the coursework with characteristic intensity, studying late into the evening and asking detailed questions during instruction periods. Her academic performance was exceptional, but she knew that the real test would come when they moved to practical exercises. Many students who excelled in the classroom struggled when faced with the pressure of live fire exercises and field conditions. The first shooting test came on the 6th day of the course. Students had to engage targets at ranges from 300 to 800 meters, demonstrating the precision and consistency required of military snipers. Elena approached the firing line with the same calm focus she had displayed since basic training. But the stakes felt much higher now. The rifle was a precision instrument far superior to anything she had used before. With a powerful scope and match-grade ammunition, capable of incredible accuracy in skilled hands, Elena settled into position behind the weapon, adjusting her body and equipment with practiced efficiency. Her first shot at 300 meters struck the target dead center, followed by 9 more hits in a group tight enough to be covered by a silver dollar. As the range extended to 500, then 600, then 800 meters, her accuracy remained consistent and deadly. When the scores were announced that evening, Elena had achieved the highest score in the class, outperforming soldiers with years more experience. But instead of celebration, she felt only quiet satisfaction and determination to continue improving. Master Sergeant Thompson approached her after the scores were posted, his expression unreadable. "Outstanding shooting, Vasquez," he said quietly. "But marksmanship is only about 30% of what makes a good sniper. The real challenges are just beginning." The stalking phase of training tested students' ability to move undetected across open terrain while carrying a rifle and equipment. Elena had to crawl for hours through thick brush, carefully advancing toward an observation post where instructors with powerful binoculars searched for any sign of movement. Drawing on skills learned during hunting trips with her grandfather, Elena moved like a ghost through the landscape, freezing when instructors' binoculars swept in her direction, and advancing only when she was certain she couldn't be seen. After 6 hours of painstaking movement, she reached the firing position undetected and successfully engaged the target. Of the 36 students who started the course, only 22 remained by the 4th week. The academic load, combined with the physical demands and psychological pressure of constant evaluation, had proven too much for many otherwise capable soldiers. Elena not only survived the attrition, she thrived. Her scores remained at the top of the class, and her field performance demonstrated the kind of patience and discipline that marked a natural sniper. More importantly, she had begun to earn the grudging respect of her fellow students and instructors. The final test was a comprehensive exercise that combined all the skills learned during the course. Students had to conduct a multi-day mission, moving undetected to an observation position, gathering intelligence on simulated enemy activities, and finally engaging designated targets at extreme range. Elena spent 2 days and nights in position, carefully observing and documenting the activities in a simulated enemy compound. When the time came for the final shot, she had calculated every variable: wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, range, and target movement patterns. The target appeared at the designated time, a figure moving between buildings at a range of 1,000 meters. Elena controlled her breathing, settled her crosshairs, and squeezed the trigger with the same smooth pressure she had been perfecting for years. The shot struck exactly where she had aimed, a perfect hit that demonstrated mastery of every skill taught in the course. Around her, other students attempted their own shots with varying degrees of success. When the final results were announced, Elena had not only graduated from sniper school, she had finished first in her class. The woman who had once been mocked for her soft hands now wore the distinctive sniper tab on her uniform, marking her as one of the Army's elite precision shooters. Master Sergeant Thompson presented her with the Honor Graduate Award during the graduation ceremony, his words carrying new respect and professional recognition. Specialist Vasquez has demonstrated exceptional skill, dedication, and professionalism throughout this course, he announced. She represents the finest traditions of the sniper community and will undoubtedly serve with distinction in whatever unit she joins. As Elena stood at attention holding her graduation certificate, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the skeptical faces on that first day at the firing range in basic training, to the respect of the military's most elite marksman instructors, she had proven that skill and determination mattered more than preconceived notions about what a soldier should look like. Her hands, once dismissed as too soft for military service, had guided precision shots that few soldiers could match. Those same hands would soon carry a sniper rifle into combat, where the lives of her fellow soldiers might depend on her ability to place a bullet exactly where it needed to go. The girl from Texas who had once been jeered at for her appearance had become something far more impressive. A warrior whose deadly skill had been forged through dedication, training, and an unwavering belief in her own potential. The transformation was complete, but Elena knew that the real test would come when she faced an enemy who could shoot back.